Hello and welcome to our second West London Sport special QPR podcast of this week. Following on from our closer look at Karamoko Dembele with Dan Bennett on Tuesday, I'm joined today by Sean Carroll to discuss Koki Saito. Sean is a Tokyo-based journalist who's covered Japanese football for 15 years and recently written a book called Between the Lines, Navigating Japanese Football. So what he doesn't know about the J-League isn't worth knowing. Saito has joined on loan from Belgian outfit Lommel with view to making the move permanent at the end of the season and could become QPR's first ever Japanese player if he plays against Sheffield United on Saturday. Sean, thanks so much for joining me. Now, you've known all about Koki from his time with Yokohama FC in Japan's second tier. What can you tell us about him and how is he viewed as a player back home?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the big intro there. Hopefully I can live up to that hype. Yeah, to be honest, it's a bit of a weird one because he's been away now for over 3 years from Japan. And one of the years when he was here, when he was playing in J1 for Yokohama, was the COVID interrupted year, which everyone kind of was such a mess all around the world. But yeah, when he first came through at Yokohama, he was really how can I put it, really unusual, especially for Japan, because he joined them. I think he was still only 16 and still technically kind of a high school student. So he came on. They have different levels of registration here for sort of younger players. I think it was called like a second level registration or something. So he was in the squad when he was still only 16. He made his debut that season, and I think I'm right saying he became their youngest ever player. So he still wasn't 17. I think he was 16 in 11 months or something. So he only made a couple of appearances that first season. But even the fact that he was involved in the squad, like in Europe, it's reasonably more common that teenagers get involved in squads and stuff like that. Over here, it's a lot rarer. I mean, even Kaoru Mitoma, for instance, at Brighton, didn't join Kawasaki's top team till he was 22 because he went to uni. So to be in and around the first team at 16 was unusual. And he made a couple of sub appearances on the bench a couple more times that year. It was only really the next year when he started to feature more regularly, and it was clear then that he was something special, and he probably wasn't going to be around in the J League for that long because he was already playing fairly regularly, either coming off the bench as an impact sub or even starting games. He scored, I think, a handful, maybe a few more goals, was getting assists that season too. And everybody kind of around the Japanese game knew at that point he's probably not going to be sticking around for long. Although having said that, even back then, it's 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't that common for Japanese players to go abroad that early. They usually have to establish themselves 2 or 3 years first in the J League before they got the chance. So the fact that he went when he was still only, I think, probably 19 over to Lommel was at the time was still seen as something kind of slightly unusual for the Japanese game at that point, because most of his playing had been in J2. He only got the one season in J1, and that was that COVID interrupted year where they sort of crammed the whole season into about 6 months. But yeah, he's a fantastic player, can play on the left or kind of as a support striker or as a kind of false nine. Very direct, very creative, lively. He's not the biggest, but he doesn't shy away from the physical side of the game either. He's one of those players, or he was when he first came through in the J League. Obviously, the style of play in the Championship will be a bit different. You'd hope that he's adapted from his time in Belgium, but whenever he got the ball, there was that kind of excitement that something was going to happen. He is really kind of direct and driven towards making things happen.
Now, he played in the Olympics for Japan. I know there was a bit of disappointment they only got as far as the quarterfinals, but
yeah,
is he viewed as the kind of the key man in that side, or is he just a part of the attacking lineup in the team?
I wouldn't say he's seen as the key man. He was definitely seen as one of the players that could be the difference for them at this Olympics. But they've got so many players. Japan produces traditionally so many players in those positions, either number 10 or the wide attacking roles. I mean, Yu Hirakawa has just gone to Bristol City as well. Sakamoto is at Coventry. You've got all these kind of players. Miyoshi was at Birmingham last year as well. There's so many technically adept, creative players that I think, maybe teams in England, not just in the Premier League now, are noticing that they've got these skills that maybe players in England don't traditionally have. So it adds something to the team in that sense. So with Saito, he was definitely seen as a potential to be a difference maker at the Olympics, and he put in a really good performance in their one of the last friendlies they had before the Olympics that got hopes up a bit. But yeah, they had 4, 5, 6 players in those positions that were all kind of capable of making stuff happen. So yeah, I don't think he was seen necessarily as the big hope ahead of the Olympics, but he's certainly one that fans here see as having plenty of potential.
The players you mentioned there, and obviously You got Matoma at Brighton, as you've already mentioned, and Dyson Maeda and Hatate and Kyogo at Celtic. I mean, it seems to be a real kind of a talented bunch of Japanese players sort of breaking
Yeah,
through now. I mean, I know there's always been kind of, even go back to 10 years ago with the guy at Dortmund that went to United, whose name is I've
Shinji
forgotten.
Kagawa.
Shinji
Yep.
Kagawa. They've always
Yep.
been talented players coming through, but is this kind of seen now as a real sort of like a talented group from grown up together from kind of sort of 16 onwards?
I don't think so. I think what it more is now is that I think European clubs have realised, because of what the likes of Kagawa, Keisuke Honda as well was around for a bit, and I think those players kind of raised the bar in terms of proving that Japanese players could do it in Europe, which then gave other clubs. I mean, you see it now with the way that Brighton, for example, do their scouting. So many clubs now are trying to find players cheaper, bring them over, and then if they do work out well, you've got a good player maybe for a year, 2, 3 years, and then you can sell them on to the bigger clubs. So I think now what we're seeing is, because scouts, coaches, fans as well in Europe are now seeing that Japanese players are good enough to cope, it means that more teams are taking risks and bringing over players from Japan, because if it doesn't work out, you don't really lose anything. They're relatively cheap to buy, or in QPR's case, you obviously got him on loan. So there's low risk, but there's high reward in these players. So I think there's always been, I mean, yeah, you mentioned I've been here 15 years, and there's always been players in the J League that you think they could easily do it in England. And I think it was initially partly coming from the European side, that scouts and coaches maybe thought there's too much of a risk, maybe they can't cut it here. And there was definitely a mental barrier too for Japanese players, where they felt like, maybe I'm not good enough to go to Europe. I need to wait till I've been in the national team, or until I've played a few more years here. But now you're seeing more and more players like Saito did when he moved over at 19, having only really played in J2. You see more players that can see that their peers, or players 3, 4, 5 years older, did do it, so they realise they can do it. So I think there's that element now, that more and more players are noticing it, and you're seeing kind of now in Japan, more people are worried that the level of the J League might drop, because all the best players might only play 6 months in the J League, and then somebody in Europe comes calling. Especially because the J League here runs from like February to November, as opposed to the European season, which runs obviously August to May. So you get this in the summer, where the clubs over here are losing their best players in the middle of their season, because European clubs want to bring them in for the start of theirs. So there are a lot of good players coming through, and as you mentioned, Japan, the fact that they were disappointed to get knocked out of the quarterfinals of the Olympics, that they were disappointed that they couldn't get past Croatia at the last World Cup, is showing that the level of football here is raising, and that their expectations are raising. So there's definitely a lot of good players coming through, but I don't know if it's necessarily a new thing, or it's just now there are more opportunities for them, and that the players themselves have got the confidence to go and test themselves. And with Saito, yeah, he would have seen what Sakamoto did, what Miyoshi did, and he'll see that the championship is somewhere that he can play, and he'll back himself, I think, to do well there.
I guess is Matoma seen as the superstar of Japanese football at the moment?
Yeah, I think he's probably, I would say so. Takefusa Kubo as well at Real Sociedad is another one who always had this reputation, because he went to Barcelona so young and was in there. It was in La Masia and stuff. So he's another one. Mitoma and Kubo are probably the two that I kind of seen. And maybe if you talk about kids that want to go and watch the team wearing shirts and stuff. But then within the sort of football community, fans, media, whatever, the likes of Wataru Endo at Liverpool, Tomiyasu at Arsenal as well. There's players sort of all throughout the squad now, not just those attacking positions, that are doing it regularly at a really high level. So I think, but yeah, I'd say probably Mitoma is definitely. I mean, he obviously last season he had the injuries and stuff, so kind of maybe faded a little bit out of people's sort of sight lines. But I think, yeah, he's seems to be fit now. From the bits I've seen of him in pre-season, he looks like he's getting back to his best. So if he can stay fit, I think this season he'll definitely be pushing on again in the sort of public consciousness in that sense.
And just for people who perhaps haven't seen the J League before, what's the kind of what's the style? Is it a physical style? Is it a very technical style? Is it a bit of both?
It's not especially physical. It's always hard to compare. You often see these arguments on social media where they say this league is better than that league, and it's impossible really to compare and say what it's equivalent to in England. I think it is technical, it is tactical. More so, it's not especially physical. I think that's something that's ingrained in the culture here. Referees are quick to stamp down if there's any physicality, even if it's a fair tackle. If it looks aggressive, they tend to give free kicks. which is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to preparing players to go obviously and play in Europe, especially in England, especially in the Championship, perhaps, where I'm sure there's a lot more physical play than there is here. But on the flip side, players are incredibly technically adept, not just number 10s and attacking players, but defenders here too. Players, foreign players I've spoken to at the company that have said it's unbelievable the level of technique that players all over the pitch have. And then tactical awareness is not as good because the game tends to be a bit more predictable here because there aren't those physical aspects. Teams tend to sort of play their way and feel each other out a lot. So players tend to need to adapt a bit to, once they get to Europe, developing that sort of understanding of the transitions in play, the nuances of how the game can change. You know, the fact that the atmosphere in English stadiums tends to ebb and flow with the game, whereas here fans tend to just sing throughout. It's a very kind of monotonous atmosphere. But again, with Koki having been in Belgium for a few years now, he's definitely had that time to adapt. Mitoma as well was in Belgium, I think only for about 6-7 months before he went into Brighton. So it does seem that pathway from Belgium into England has worked well for players so far.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange situation now with Lommel because he signed for them, but he's been on loan at Sparta Rotterdam for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess that moving country to country isn't going to phase him too much. I mean, just in terms of linguistically, though, he doesn't speak English. I mean, for a Japanese player coming over to London, is that difficult? Or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that the language is such a key aspect of moving abroad for these players. Not necessarily on the pitch, because you don't really need to speak that much on the pitch. You only need a few words. It's a lot of it is body language and movement and stuff like that. But if you want to settle, if you want to be able, if you're happy off the pitch and able to get by in your life and get stuff done and make friends, then it means you're better in a better place then to be doing well on the pitch. So I don't know if he speaks any English. I'd assume he must have a little bit. If he's been in Belgium and Holland playing for a couple of years now. What often happens with the players is they can get by in English, but they're quite shy about using it in public.
Right.
So I went and did an interview with a different player up at Brighton recently, and was speaking to their press guy about Mitoma, and he said, yeah, he doesn't really like doing stuff in English. His English is fine, but they do have this thing about they don't really like using it, which I kind of understand, because there's been times where I've had to do stuff in Japanese, and if I'm just talking to someone off the record, you don't mind. But if suddenly someone sticks a camera in front of you and says, can we just ask you about this, you instantly become a bit more conscious of the fact that you might say something wrong, you might not get the nuance across, you might use the wrong word, and then it's there on the internet forever. So I understand it. I'd have thought he can probably get by enough, especially having gone there as young as he did. You'd feel like he had the enthusiasm then to really give it a go. And the fact that he moved abroad, the fact that he started professionally at 16 and moved abroad at 19 suggests that he's got plenty of self-confidence. So if his English isn't that good at the moment, I'd like to think that over the course of this season he will definitely be working at it. And although I was sort of the guy that interviewed up at Brighton the other day was saying, there's loads of players now in the Premier League coming from all over the world, and lots of them maybe don't have the best English, but you find a way to communicate. That's changing rooms now, I think, in leagues probably all over the world are becoming so much more international that it maybe isn't as big a deal as it used to be. But absolutely, it's a tool that if you've got it, certainly helps you to integrate on and off the pitch.
So lots to be excited about for QPR fans, then, you think?
Yeah, I think so. If he obviously the season's already started and he's just come in, so he'll take a little bit of time to get up to speed and get used to what the manager wants, how his teammates are playing. But yeah, absolutely, he's got all the potential, all the tools, I think, to do well. And as I said, to maybe add something that players traditionally in English players don't have, those aspects that he can really bring in and add something different. So I think he's got a lot of those attributes that the QPR fans and I'm sure his teammates will be delighted to have had added to the squad.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks for your time.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot. Take care.